So I'm going to talk to you about King David. King David was one of the most influential and inspiring characters of the Old Testament, and that plays a big role in different religions such as Judaism, Christianity, Islam. So what can we learn from David's personality, and how can it help through looking at David's personality is how he deals with people that try to overtake his kingdom, how he deals with betrayal, even how he deals with his successes and achievements. So David gives us a great example of how we can deal with some of the difficult circumstances in life. And so why should you listen to me when studying about someone's personality? Well, for those of you who are not aware, I have a medical degree and a medical background, so I can prescribe medications and I can know certain aspects of one's biological makeup that can affect their personality and how they deal with others in life. Compare this to people like social workers, therapists, psychologists, counselors. They may know about people's personality and characteristics. They may not be able to know a lot of the medical or scientific stuff that can be going on that may be influencing these behaviors. So although Dr. Jordan Peterson may sound a lot more sophisticated than I am, this actually may be deeper, important to follow these steps. First of all, when looking at someone's personality, you have to look at their biological perspective, which is where the medical knowledge and scientific part can really play a role. Also psychological, social, spiritual, and cultural. All those can impact one's personality. And by one's personality, I'm referring to how one thinks, how one behaves, and how one acts. That really makes up one's personality. And so there is this teaching and like psychological or spiritual component, or even people who give their opinions, is that you can't really change one's personality. Well, I do not think that is correct. There are certain aspects of one's genetics that you cannot change in one's biological characteristics, but personality you can change. For example, not everyone who starts their life as good ends up being good till their death. Sometimes they turn into being bad. People who start their life as bad can also end up being good. It's that saying goes, every saint has a past, every sinner has a future. So yes, personalities can change, but some things that do not change is like someone's temperament. Temperament is this sort of innate quality or innate reaction, how they deal with certain life events or how they respond to life. That part is thought scientifically to be really relatively consistent in one's life. But it's not necessarily black and white. Oftentimes there's a continuum where they lean more one direction or lean more another direction. But for the most part, people's personality are shaped by these three factors: their thoughts, their feelings, their actions. So if you change any one of those, that can help affect one's personality. And that's also why it's so important that one has an accurate viewpoint of life and the world around them. Okay, so what do we know about David's biological makeup? Physically, we know he wasn't appearing that strong or valiant, not someone who'd be a king. The prophet that was anointing him thought it would be one of his 7 older brothers that would be more anointed because they appeared more outwardly like a warrior, someone who could fight, someone who could play that king role. So does David, being the youngest, have an effect on his biological makeup? Not necessarily, but there may be a psychological component there. For example, being the youngest of 8 boys, maybe he was able to learn from his older brothers, maybe he was picked on a little bit, but that's maybe for another lesson. As far as right now, an aspect that can help us understand David's temperament is what he did in his life. And so we'll fast forward to maybe his teenage years or adolescent years, maybe young adult years. We know that David took care of sheep. His taking care of sheep, we can know that he falls into some of these characteristics of a temperament style, that he was attached to people, in particular he was attached to God socially, and he was very persistent. Well, how do we know David was persistent? Well, we know that he played instruments well. He played the flute, he played the harp. When King Saul was the king at the time and he was in distress, they asked for David to come comfort him, and David would play music for him that helped to relieve Saul's distress. And if anyone's tried to play a music, you know it takes determination, it takes practice. You got to persist with it. So I think this is a good example that shows David's persistence, his diligence, and his being able to work hard to learn these instruments. David used instruments throughout his life because he's wrote psalms throughout his life, and many of these psalms are played in a musical fashion. Another feature that shows David's persistence is his determination. For example, when he went to fight Goliath, people were telling him not to fight. His brothers were there telling him not to go fight, but David was persistent and he went and fought. And not only did he fought, but he shot the slingshot in a perfect way, or a near perfect way, that it had to strike Goliath correctly in order for him to fall down and David could be victorious. So we know that David was enthusiastic as well, and according to the psychiatry textbook, enthusiasm can fall under persistence, and that David was one of the only people willing to fight Goliath, who's likely 3 to 4 feet taller and a much better warrior than David was, yet David was able to show that determination in order to fight him. So how does David show this other temperament style of being reward dependent or being attached to people socially? We know that David was a shepherd and took care of sheep, and we can see through Psalm 23 how he attaches himself to God. If we look at the opening line of the psalm, it says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." So David shows his affection here to God, describing God as his shepherd, and he also shows I shall not want, like I shall not want the things of this world, money, fame, power. That wasn't on David's concern. His concern was having that relationship with God. So David uses these characteristics to describe God as saying God is his shepherd. God is the one who protects him, who guides him, who watches over him, who cares for him. And we also know that David was able to focus on God because I shall not want any of the other things that will distract him from it. He focuses his life on God. The next verse goes, "He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters." So here David is showing that sentimental side in which he describes how God is treating him and caring for him. It goes, "He restores my soul. He leads me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake." So David is open for other experience that will lead him to the path of righteousness. He trusts that God is going to lead him in that direction. "Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me." David is open to these other experiences, even though it'll lead him to uncomfortable situations that can lead him on the verge of death, but he trusts that God, who is that faithful shepherd, will protect and guide him. So David doesn't avoid necessarily risk or being challenged, but he sees it as an opportunity to trust in God and to rely on God. "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over." So David, again, is open to the experiences that God guides him, even if it meant he'll be close to his enemies. And enemies here is referring to like spiritual enemies, like the devil and the demons. And so you got to separate the people from the problem. People aren't really the problem. People are made in God's image, but the problem is the devil that's really influencing these people to cause harm. And David's life is a good example that teaches that lesson. So David knew, though, that he was anointed by God, that he would be protected by God, and that he would overflow with blessings regardless of what he would encounter in life. "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." So again, David shows his warm affection to God and his attachment to God, and that he believes he will persist with God forever. So now that we see how David fits these temperament styles of reward dependence and persistence, how does this affect his biological makeup, his neurotransmitters? So it's thought that certain neurotransmitters affect these pathways. Meaning for the reward dependence, it's thought that norepinephrine and serotonin are used in these pathways. And interestingly, these molecules are often implicated in depression pathways. And then for the persistent type of pathway, it's thought to also be serotonin, but also another neurotransmitter called glutamate. And so we can see if when David's life is firing in all cylinders, get a glimpse of how he's thinking, how he's feeling, and it's going to affect his actions. Other parts of his life, when he has a difficult time, we see that he's not high in these categories, but he's actually low. He gets lazy, he gets aloof, he gets disconnected, but maybe that's for another video. For now, I'd like to look at other biological characteristics that we know of David's life. For example, nutrition. Nutrition can play an important role in how one thinks and feels. We know David, and especially in times of mourning or grieving, he would fast in his life. That's about all we know from his nutrition. As far as sleep, again, we know sleep has an important role in how one thinks and feels and how it affects their immune system and stuff like that. And David, he wouldn't go to sleep before praying to God, letting God know all his worries, his fears, his desires, praising and thanking God. And we know how David prayed a lot through the Psalms. Some other biological conditions that can play a role in how David thinks, feels, or behaves include medical diseases, if he was using any drugs or alcohol, if he was on any medications. For that part, I'm really not sure, so I can't really comment how that part influenced David's life. But in conclusion, this may sound like a sermon or a Sunday school lesson, but we can see that if David's life is any indication, to use our gifts and talents, to work hard at them and use them in one way or another to get close to God and to glorify God, whether that's through helping others, whether it's through our service or through our life. Each one is going to have a specific genetic makeup and personality style that's unique to them. But what we do have to do is make sure our thoughts, our feelings, our actions are in the right place in order for us to create that masterpiece that God has for us. Another way to look at it is if our thoughts are in the wrong place, if our thoughts are anxious, that's going to lead to anxious feelings. That's going to change our behaviors. Maybe we'll isolate or stay away from those things that cause us anxiety or worries. If we think sad or depressed thoughts, we may feel sad or depressed, and we may isolate or avoid doing activities that we enjoy because we're not really feeling like it. On the contrary, if we have the right thought, the right outlook on life, maybe our feelings will follow and our actions can follow accordingly. So it's important to learn about the correct ways of living and dealing with life, especially through difficult circumstances, because that'll help one to persevere through the struggles. So it's important to learn about correct ways of living and dealing with others and about God in general, so that our thoughts can be directed in the right place and our actions and feelings can follow. Be sure to subscribe to this channel if you want to see more videos, and like if you like this video and like to see more like it.